Okay, now it's time to build the front end. In this section, I'm going to show you a different way to build forms. So earlier, to add a customer, we built a form like this. So we used the helper method like html.beginForm, label for, text box for, and so on. In this kind of form, when the user clicks the submit button, they have to wait for the server to respond. And quite often, the browser goes blank for a second or two, if not more, until the server responds. Now, there is a different way to post data to the server, which creates a faster and smoother user experience. We use AJAX, which means instead of posting data using a traditional HTML form, we call the server asynchronously in the background. And this way, the page doesn't flicker until the server responds. So in this section, we're going to use AJAX to call our new rental API. If you're new to the concept of AJAX, read the PDF I've attached to this lecture. Now, let's build a very basic form for renting movies. In Solution Explorer, right-click Controllers and add a new controller. We set this to an MVC5 controller and call it Rentals Controller. Next, we rename this action to New. We're going to use this to return the form to the client. So, let's create the view. With ReSharper, it's pretty easy. We put the cursor here, Alt and Enter, and Enter, and Enter. We can set the title to New Rental Form. Now, we don't really need to set the layout here because there is a default value for it. So let me delete this line and show you where that default value is set. So in Solution Explorer, go to Views, underline View Start. What we have here will be placed on top of all views. So we can see the layout is set and we don't have to specify it in every view. Now let's close this. So to create a form, we are not going to use html.beginForm because that would create a traditional HTML form. Instead, I'm just going to use raw HTML. Like this. Now with traditional HTML forms, we set the action here. This action specifies the endpoint that this form will be posted to. So when we use html.beginForm and specify an action and controller here, this method would get the URL for that action and put it here. Like this. But again, as I said, we're not going to use this action attribute. Now, in case you have some familiarity with the MVC, we also have a helper method called ajax.beginForm. But this helper method is designed to call actions in MVC controllers, not API controllers. If you want to call an action in a web API, the syntax gets really ugly. And that's why I prefer to use raw HTML. Okay, now let me show you a cool technique to quickly create markup. We call this Zen coding. So in this form, I want to have a div with the class form-group. Inside this div, I want to have a label. And next to this label, I want to have an input with the attribute type set to text. And I want this input to have the class form-control. Now press Tab, and we get this markup. So if you have installed Web Essentials plugin that I told you at the beginning of the course, you get this feature, which is called Zen coding. So let's set the label here, customer. Let's repeat one more time. I want a div with the class form-group. So this is CSS syntax. We use CSS syntax to generate HTML markup. Inside this div, I want to have a label. And next to this label, I want to have an input with the type attribute set to text. And I want this input to have the class form-control. Tab. This label is going to be movie. And finally, I want to have a button with two classes, btn and btn-primary. And let's just call this submit. Let's test our form. Control F5. Okay, we have customer and movie. Now later, we're going to add auto-completion to these text boxes. Before I finish this lecture, let's put a link to this form on our navigation bar. With ReSharper, you can quickly find a file using Control, Shift, and N. If this doesn't work on your machine, it's because you're using a different keyboard scheme. It's one of the settings of ReSharper. So you need to press Control, Shift, T. Let's go to this file. Underline navbar. We created this partial view earlier in the course, and as you can see, it's stored in views/shared. So if you're not using ReSharper, you need to manually open this file. Okay, now I'm going to put a new link here. HTML.action link, new rental, which points to the new action in rentals controller.